Coming up on the Sky News Daily with me, Niall Paterson, a trade agreement has been struck between the UK and the United States. So, who's got the better end of the deal? We all know Donald Trump loves a deal, so I suppose we should be somewhat flattered that he chose the UK for his first post-tariffs trade agreement.
This is a maxed out deal that we're going to make bigger. I think it's going to be something very special for UK and special for the United States.
Mr. President.
Little surprise, those sentiments were shared this side of the pond. I mean, it's not as if the Prime Minister has had much good news of late.
To be able to announce this great deal is incredibly important and makes this truly historic.
He's also had another wee bit of good news in terms of interest rates. We'll have more on that a little later. But let's see if we can establish if this deal actually works for the UK. Someone who may well know, our business correspondent, Paul Kelso. Good to see you, Paul. So first and foremost, you've been in the briefings. You know what the detail of the deal is. Tell us about it.
Well, this deal appears to be a mixture of quick wins for the UK, some less clear victories, and certainly meeting some long-held US demands. Headline numbers are that steel and aluminium tariffs have gone from 25% imposed by Donald Trump a little while ago to 0. Good news for the British steel and aluminium industry as it tries to secure a future for itself. Cars, which are the centre of concerns here. US is the biggest export market, was facing 25% tariffs. That tariff is cut to 10% on a quota of 100,000 vehicles a year. That is less than the number of cars the UK exported to the US last year. It was over 110,000. It was 140,000 the year before. So that is better than it was a month ago, but it's not better than the long-standing status quo. Jet engines will be 0 tariff and air parts from Rolls-Royce. That's good news for that particular industry. It's been worth about £17 billion in exports over the last 5 years, so very significant. On agriculture, and this has been the big ask of the US for a very long time, this has been the concession the UK has had to make, is to allow greater access to agriculture. We don't get much detail. One thing we know about is beef. 13,000 metric tonnes of US beef will be able to be imported to the UK without attracting tariffs, and the same will be able to go in the other direction, crucially. But we are told there is no change to agricultural standards, which is a huge issue for British farming. It's a huge issue for UK trade, because if you don't stick to standards, you can't do a deal with the EU.
I mean, listen to Donald Trump, listen to Sir Keir Starmer, listen indeed to Lord Mandelson, our ambassador to the United States, and every one of them to a man would tell you this is a fantastic deal. Is it?
It's not a fantastic deal, but it is a deal. I think we have to start at where expectations are. Any deal, probably in the circumstances, particularly for the car industry, is probably a good deal. If the US was not for turning on a 10% tariff on cars, and we've got to bear in mind there are other negotiations at play here, China, and when it comes to cars, particularly with the European Union, if the UK really thought a 10% tariff on a quota of British cars that's in the region of what we sell to the US anyway was the bottom line, then they're probably right to have taken it. I think when it comes to agriculture, they will think that if food standards remain where they are, giving more access to beef that isn't hormone treated, certainly British farmers will think their product can punch its weight against American beef. I was speaking to one this week. He is actually quite keen on the idea of trying to sell into the US. It's been restricted by tariffs and other restrictions. He thinks grass-fed, high-quality British beef can trade alongside whiskey and salmon as a luxury product. So they quite fancy the access to the market. This might just be the start on agriculture as well. Donald Trump said they're looking at all the meat categories, so pork and chicken, as long as the standards remain in place. That seems like an area where there will be a shift. And that's where the US has always thought they don't think there's actually much to be gained from Britain as an export market, except in agriculture, where there's clearly a market that they want to try and get into.
Paul, is this one of those occasions where any deal would be better than no deal? Of course, I've lifted that from the whole Brexit discussion, but it feels like actually it might well be.
Yeah, and that clearly seems to be the reasoning from Downing Street. Look, on both sides, in both the White House and Downing Street, there's value in being the first deal. Donald Trump to show he can do one. For Keir Starmer, second trade deal in a week to show that he is a Trump whisperer, if you like. He can get deals out of this guy. The detail will be key here. The car industry, I haven't seen the reaction yet. They're in a better position than they were. 25% tariffs on cars, many were saying was existential, a remarkable thing to say about companies companies like Jaguar Land Rover and Bentley, luxury products, high price tags, but 25% on top is very, very hard to stomach. So they've got a better deal, and 100,000 cars can go at that 10% tariff. I think most people think they could probably swallow that. It's probably not good news for the supply chain, where some of that cost will have to be offset and ultimately consumers probably pay more. But for steel and aluminium, it's an absolute win. The steel industry, as we know, huge pressure in the UK, government spending billions of pounds to try and keep it alive, having to take control of British Steel to keep it going. You know, zero tariffs on steel and aluminium is good news, but worth bearing in mind, you know, in terms of its value to the UK economy, it's got strategic importance and it's got sort of totemic importance. It's only worth £2.6 billion in exports over the last 5 years to the US. It's not nothing, but it's not in the same league as cars and jets or indeed our global agriculture trade.
Paul, there's been plenty of chat that the big American tech firms, your Amazons, your Apples and so on, weren't desperately happy about the government's proposed digital services tax. But I've heard nothing about that today.
No, we thought that might be the chip that would have to be pushed over by the UK in these negotiations. And that's partly because, you know, the US imposed all these tariffs, which on Donald Trump's own logic for tariffs, which is to get rid of trade deficits, the UK shouldn't even be receiving. But in the face of these massive tariffs, well, the UK doesn't tariff very highly. I mean, the highest one I can find on the list we were imposing was 12% on beef. So we didn't have much to give, although we've given most of what we have, it's fair to say. So the digital services tax, which is a 2% levy on the revenues of search engines, online marketplaces, social media from the UK, seemed to be something that would give. It's worth less than £1 billion to the Exchequer at the moment. So while it would be symbolic and significant, particularly with all the concerns around online safety, it seems that it survives for now.
Isn't this a complete vindication of Donald Trump's tactics? There were plenty of people this side of the Atlantic who were scoffing on so-called Liberation Day, the day all those tariffs came in. But as a result of this deal, the United States will be better off, the United Kingdom will be worse off. Isn't that correct?
It's certainly how it looks. It's certainly what the US wants us to think. And Howard Lutnick, Trump's Commerce Secretary, was standing in front of one of those big boards that they like to roll out on these occasions. And he had a fascinating corner of the chart, UK tariffs, which were at 5.1% on average, he says, on the goods we're talking about. Well, they've gone down to 1.8%. So he's got the UK tariffs down. What's happened to US tariffs on the UK? They've gone up from 3.4% to 10%. So on the US measures, you're right, we are facing higher import taxes to the US than we were. There are some caveats here. For example, there is that beef exception. We now might be able to sell in to the US market, but let's bear in mind that the US market, certainly for food and agriculture, is very, very small in comparison to the European Union, which is one that really counts. And I think when we look at this, the real win here, some kind of a deal to save face with the US and to help some specific industries under acute pressure, but to keep alive this hope of a genuine reset with the European Union.
Paul, as of this point, tariffs remain in place, don't they? And even once this deal comes into effect, there will still be significant tariffs. Should we not be concerned that this American president, prone to fits of pique in the way in which we have all seen previously, could wake up tomorrow morning and decides they want more?
Absolutely. We don't know all the detail, but we know the real details of this are yet to be negotiated. We know Donald Trump likes to squeeze the person on the other side of the table as hard as we can. We heard Peter Mandelson in the Oval Office in one of the more surreal moments of a pretty surreal announcement, giving forward the information that Donald Trump had phoned Keir Starmer halfway through the Arsenal game to make a whole load of new demands. We don't know how
distraction.
Absolutely right. Well, perhaps Sir Keir thinks he has grabbed victory from defeat, unlike his football team.
A bit of not unrelated news today, Paul, that Sir Keir Starmer has already been crowing about. The interest rate cut by the Bank of England. Explain exactly what's happened and why he's so chuffed.
He's chuffed because it's another cut to interest rates on his watch. Politicians, we have enjoyed the spectacle, haven't we, of them claiming credit for things over which they have not complete control, crucially inflation and interest rates. But it's another cut, 0.25% cut down to 4.25%. Really interesting. That reduces costs, right? It reduces costs for homeowners, potentially anyone remortgaging. Not great news for savers, but it brings down some of the cost of living pressures across the board. Interesting was the way this broke down. There are 9 people who take a vote, and there was a 3-way split. 5 wanted a 0.25% cut, 2 wanted to hold, 2 wanted to go for 0.5%. And that reflects, I think, the underlying message from listening to the Governor of the Bank of England. We've been talking about uncertainty, haven't we, throughout this discussion? Well, that's reflected even in the Bank of England, in the lobbies with the brightest and brainiest economists. They don't know what's going to happen next. They've got 2 scenarios from inflation to impact on inflation as a result of the trade war. It could go up or it could go down. And I could get into the detail of why that is, but it all depends on how this plays out, whether we get cheap goods dumped on us from countries that can't sell to the US, or whether supply chains are so disrupted that costs go up across the board, and they simply don't know. Their hunch is inflation will continue around the 2% mark, and they can continue to cut carefully and gradually, as they put it. But there are no done deals there. And the reason for that, ultimately, we come back to the Oval Office and the man who is calling the shots, even if here with the UK, he has had to give up something to get his deal as well as ours.
Paul, can we please just park the data points, the fractions, the decimals, the data just for a second? My head's beginning to hurt. I mean, when Sir Keir Starmer goes to bed tonight, when he slips on his gym jams and he's lying in bed reflecting, I mean, he is going to think that this is a good day, if only politically, isn't he?
Absolutely. And I suspect if you're a Prime Minister, you have an approach that every day is a good day, because you're seldom wrong, but it really is economically. You have a cut to interest rates, which will be welcome and be felt more directly probably by everyone in their pocket than what's going on in the world of international trade. But he's done not just a deal to try and alleviate the worst impacts of what Donald Trump was throwing at the UK by way of trade, but he's also done a deal with one of the fastest growing economies in the world, in India. He's pulled off 2 deals that defied the previous government, 2 big post-Brexit deals. He never backed Brexit. He didn't want to be doing these kind of deals, but he has made progress. So I think ultimately he will think it's been a good week. He might, however, pause for a moment in the early hours and wonder if he'll get any credit for it, because he only has to go back 7 days to an epic shooing from the electorate who don't buy it so far.
Thanks, Paul. For the latest on what's taking place between the United States and the United Kingdom in that trade agreement, head to skynews.com. That's a lot for this edition of The Daily. However, we will be back tomorrow when I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear we will be covering the new Pope. See you then.
The first 100 days might be over, but President Trump is showing no signs of slowing down.
America will soon be greater than ever before.
So we're continuing to follow every twist and turn of this remarkable presidency.
And trying to make sense of what it all means for the US and for the rest of the world.
So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Malta Kellner.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Sky News Trump 100, wherever you get your podcasts.